On the 24th of October 1994, the German watch brand Lange Söhne introduced its very first collection of watches. It was just 4 years after Ferdinand Lange's great-grandson, Walter Lange, together with Günter Blümlein, had relaunched the brand shortly after the reunification of Germany. Lange Uhren GmbH was founded on 7 December 1919 in Glashütte, and the Lange Söhne brand was registered worldwide. The goal was to put Germany back on the map of high-end watchmaking. 4 years later, 4 new watches were presented on 24 October 1994. Among these 4 timepieces, the Lange 1 best defined a new direction for the brand and in time would become the iconic face of this beautiful German watch brand. The Lange 1 was rather special, with a combination of elegance and audacity, mainly due to the layout of the dial with its off-center indications. A design that has remained unchanged since its introduction in 1994. Its distinctive features are an off-centered hour and minute dial, small second sub-dial, big date that Lange calls outsized date, and a large power reserve indicator. And the idea was that none of the indications should overlap one another. And it was the famous signature that's arching above the dial with Glashütte ISA. And if you want to know what that means, it stands for in Saxony. All the indications were positioned according to the harmonious proportions of the golden section. Even today, more than 25 years later, the watch with the unmistakable face has become a horological classic, or dare I say it, an icon. The Lange 1 has become the cornerstone of a watch family composed of 9 models, which come in various case diameters with manual winding, self-winding versions, various added complications and various metals. And of course, there are many special models and limited editions. Today we're going to talk with Wilhelm Schmidt, the CEO of the brand, about the Lange 1 and what it means for the brand to have such a watch in the collection.
You know, I think it's fair to say I probably would not stand here and talk about Lange & Söhne and about the Lange 1 without that watch. I even would question that Glashütte, as you can see it today, would look like it without the Lange 1. I think the Lange 1 was the sensation at the time because it was unusual in any way. The dimensions were bigger than a typical dress watch. It had functions that have never been realized on a wristwatch before. And it stood, you know, it stood the time because it is as interesting to look at today than it was now 27 years ago. I believe the greatest challenge of a fantastic design is to develop without losing it. So if you have the typical Lange 1 face, how do you now extend that to become a family without losing that typical face? I believe in the beginning that was a huge challenge, and it even is today. So if you then go on and see, let's take the Lange 1 tourbillon. You look at it, you see it's a Lange 1, even it is an exposed tourbillon, and then we go to I think the most complicated Lange 1 watch that we launched so far, which is the Lange 1 Tourbillon Perpetual Calendar. You look at it and it does look like a Lange 1. I think on the one hand, that is the biggest challenge, and sometimes it deserves that you rethink mechanisms that are well known. In the case of a perpetual calendar, how do you do a perpetual calendar in a watch like this? On the other hand, of course, that is cementing the importance of that family, because you can do all these different iterations. But trust me, for the team around Tony de Haas, that is a true stress test, to come up with novelties that look like a Lange 1, but be different than the original Lange 1, which we launched in 1994. We have a very clear strategy, and that is to always focus on the Lange 1. That's why you can find basically in every year a novelty of the Lange 1. We have no intentions to stop this momentum, but of course I will not share what the next idea is that we may launch in the years to come.
Now let's have a quick overview of the important Lange 1 milestones. The very first introduction was in 1994 with a Lange 1 in yellow gold with a champagne color dial. That was reference 101.001 and it was initially delivered with a closed case back. Nowadays these go for pretty impressive prices at auction. 4 years later, in 1998, Lange downsized the Lange 1 from 38.5mm to 36.8mm and they called it the Little Lange 1. In the year 2000, the Lange 1 Tourbillon saw the light of day, and 2 years later, in 2002, the Lange 1 moon phase was introduced. In 2003, the Lange 1 got a bigger brother, the Grand Lange 1, which measures 41mm in diameter. In 2005, the Lange 1 became a globetrotter and the Lange 1 time zones with 24 different time zones around the dial was introduced. The Lange 1 time zone is also the biggest of the Lange 1 family, measuring 41.9mm. In 2009, the Little Lange 1 moon phase was introduced, bringing this poetic complication to the smallest of the Lange 1 family. 2010 marks an important update for the Lange 1 with a new automatic movement. This indicates hours, minutes, date and additionally also the day of the week. Its movement needs a bit more space, so the Lange 1 Daymatic, as it is called, was introduced in a 39.5mm case. Another important launch for the Lange 1 family is in 2012 with the launch of the Lange 1 Tourbillon Perpetual Calendar. It's also the first time that a perpetual calendar appears in the Lange 1. In 2014, the moon phase was introduced in the Lange 1's larger sibling, the Grand Lange 1 moon phase. 2015, the 20-year-old Lange 1 movement is upgraded. And while you can hardly spot any differences, under the hood, it's an entirely different movement. 2021, the Lange 1 Perpetual Calendar is introduced.
If I had to nominate my favorite, it can only be the Lange 1 Tourbillon Handwerkskunst, as the team presented that in-house made black dial. To me, for the very first time, I was flabbergasted. I've never seen something more beautiful than this dial. So I have to give that the top seat in that hierarchy of watches that unfortunately I don't own, but that I really admire out of the Lange 1 family. But quite frankly, a Lange 1 moon phase black dial, I look at it and I think that's a great watch as well. To just give you two different ideas, but you may also identify I have a hang on black dials. Walter Lange's favorite was very easy. It had to be yellow gold, so it was a stock standard Lange 1 in yellow gold that he would have chosen as his daily watch. He had a few others, as we all know, but that would have been his watch out of the Lange 1 family. There was no link to the history of Lange & Söhne that you can find in the Lange 1. So it was a really new start. And yellow gold was probably the most classical material at the time, and that's why Walter Lange always had yellow gold watches. To my knowledge, he doesn't have any other material. So he had the Tourbillon Polymerite #1 in yellow gold. He was wearing a Saxonia outsized 8 with yellow gold. So yellow gold was the golden thread to his Lange & Söhne collection. And of course, he had the privilege to have one of the very first Lange 1s, which we all know today are hugely valuable. In the 90s, in the mid-90s, there were quite a few variations, and some people wanted stainless steel, and in those days we were doing things like this. We don't do that today anymore, but in those days we did. And you could buy a stainless steel watch at the price of a white gold version. That was quite extraordinary at the time, but obviously a few clever people did so. And I believe over time that was a great investment. But only very few were produced because not many had the foresight to pay white gold money for a steel watch, knowing that they will develop in value quite nicely. You know, as Lange Söhne, we aim predominantly for collectors and not for investors. So whatever I say now, please see it through the eye of a collector, not of an investor. But if, for example, you had bought one of these very first watches in 94, 95, 96, and then the price was about 27,000 German marks, that's about 13,500 euros in today's money, and you just sell it again, the going rate for these early watches is anything between 40 and 60,000 euro. Not only had you had a nice watch for a long period of time, you would have also made a decent profit on that watch when you sell it. There are other watches that I think will follow the same path. I basically believe that a Lange one will not devalue too much and over time will gain value because they become a little bit more expensive every year. And we don't even talk about the special limitations for the 25th anniversary watches. We know that a few changed hands privately, and we know it did change hand for prices fairly above the original retail price. So overall, a Lange one will never be in fashion, therefore never be out fashion. You can wear it, you can enjoy it, and very likely you get your money back, or if you're lucky, you even do a little profit. But again, remember what I said in the beginning, we are aiming for collectors, not for investors.